The military has a habit of throwing people into new situations that they aren't prepared for.
Welcome to Civvies. I'm your host, Stephanie Holman.
Did I say that?
You did say that. Today, we're diving into the inspiring journey of Trevor Spires.
Commanders like looking for minute-by-minute update of what's going on while I'm frantically Googling, phone calling, trying to figure out how to fix this problem.
An Air Force veteran turned senior solutions architect.
I'm a cloud plumber because sometimes you're laying new pipe and building a new building, and sometimes you're like unclogging toilets, you know.
Trevor and I discuss his transition from military to civilian life.
You get to reclaim your human identity
And explore his tech educator presence on social media platforms like LinkedIn and YouTube.
It put me in like a league of folks that were hybrid engineers and communicators.
So let's get started. Welcome to Civvies, where we bridge military experience and civilian triumph. I'm Stephanie Holman, this season's new host and a former Army Medical Service Corps reservist turned technical recruiter. Over the years, I've tackled a variety of terrains from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. Join me as we gather stories and explore the intersection of military expertise and civilian opportunities, providing valuable insights for a seamless journey beyond the uniform. Welcome to Civvies, a podcast by MetroStar. Welcome to MetroStar's Civvies podcast, where we're making it our mission to make your military transition just a little bit better by sharing the stories of others who've come before you. I'm your host, Stephanie Holman, and joining me today is Trevor Spires. Trevor is a senior solutions architect and Air Force veteran. Trevor, welcome. It's so good to meet you, well, virtually, here in the studio.
Thanks. So happy to be here. Love the community. Love what you all are doing with the podcast at MetroStar. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting for me on a personal level to connect with you and have you here. I would definitely describe you as a tech enthusiast and tech educator. You show up in so many ways for the tech community to share a little bit more, about your role and insights from your career. On a personal level, as a recruiter, as I've calibrated in this space, I don't come from a tech background. I'm in a constant state of learning, right? And so that means I'm an avid reader, but I'm also connecting to the folks that are in this community actively working in these positions. I think it solidifies a little bit more for my own understanding to hear it, straight from a senior solutions architect like yourself. So for those that maybe, haven't come across you on LinkedIn or don't know much about your story, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So Trevor Spires, like you mentioned, currently a senior solutions architect at AWS. And for those who may not be familiar with that role, it can mean a lot of different things. I simplify it by telling people I'm a cloud plumber, because sometimes you're laying new pipe and building a new building, and sometimes you're like unclogging toilets, and at least digital toilets. And so, that's the day-to-day of what I do. I really love getting hands-on with technology, and particularly over the last few years, I've just built a passion for helping other folks along that career journey. It took me maybe 12 years to get where I am now. I didn't have a lot of mentors along the way. I tried to do it all by myself. And I think particularly if like me, and I assume the people listening are oftentimes veterans, you have a community ready and willing to support you in that journey. And so I think that's a big part of why I'm thankful to be here. And by the way, I'm also a big fan of what you do, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Because same as you, it gave me insight into like the life of a recruiter. I've never been a recruiter, probably never will be, but to understand the day-to-day as a candidate is actually really helpful, I think, for how you work with recruiters. So kudos to you there. Too big fan of you and your stuff.
Well, thank you. And you never know. Life is an interesting journey. So if you ever want to hang it up as a senior solutions architect, we come on over to MetroStar. You'd be a great recruiter. I want to touch on something that you just mentioned that I think is really important. I'm what I would describe myself as is a human stories lover, right? I like going back to see where someone started and how they got to where they are today. And I appreciate that you mentioned it took 12 years, right, to get to this version of yourself professionally. Take me back to when you joined the Air Force, there's just so many questions I have. Did you know what you wanted to do, right? Or was it this moment where you walked into a recruiter's office, it's kind of Harry Potter style, the wand is waved in the air and they're like, boom, you're tech. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think like a lot of people now maybe that are trying to start their careers, seeing like a big buzz around things like AI and cloud and tech. Like whenever I started my career, it would have been back at around 2010, and like IT and networking was like the big thing. And so I kind of knew that there was opportunity there. I knew that I couldn't afford to go to college to study that on my own. At least I didn't think that I could. And I knew that the military was a path there. So I actually initially I thought I would join the Navy as a nuke, and then I learned more about which is basically like a nuclear. Somebody that works on nuclear reactors on submarines and Air Force carriers, which sounds cool. Right, it sounds like futuristic and awesome. But eventually I was like, I think I see more opportunity with this tech thing. And so started talking to Air Force recruiters. And my process was like, I'm a young 18-year-old kid. Like, I don't know what an AFSC, an Air Force specialty code. They have all these funny names: cyber operator, intelligence analyst, cyber transport. Like, I don't know what those are. Right. So I just picked the 10 jobs that had cyber in the name and kind of thought like, cool, I'll probably land somewhere that's tech or tech adjacent if I do that. And fortunately ended up getting an opportunity to go into what the Air Force called cyber transport systems. Gotcha. But it's just their military way of saying like a network administrator. And that was awesome. I mean, I was able to, at the ripe young age of like 19, start getting real hands-on experience with technology. So if you manage to get into like a tech type field in the military, that's a huge opportunity because you're coming out of the military. Let's say you do one enlistment, you're coming out at the same age most people are graduating from college, but you already have 4 years of experience. And so that was a huge tailwind for my career. And then on top of that, taking advantage of the GI Bill to get a free education along the way was key. Now, I will say the hardest part of all of that, for me anyway, was like working full time and going to school full time to try to set myself up for success in the private sector. That's something that not all veterans do, but if you can manage to spend a few years doing that, and I know actually you worked with a lot of veterans in the past that helping them through that journey.
Sure.
That's something that I really try to encourage people to think about, like making that sacrifice now of education early in your military career or as you're separating, so that way you don't keep kicking the can down the road of like, maybe I'll use that GI Bill one day, Right.
So maybe, for those that are listening, I always say maybe this is your someday, right? We all have to start somewhere, and it's those small steps forward that eventually get you where you want to go. We've talked about this a little bit offline. What did you learn from your experience troubleshooting, resolving technical issues early on? Like, talk to me about handling pressure, high stress situations, like those kind of early foundational pieces that probably make you pretty effective in the role that you're in now, right? Because you've been through those situations.
I think definitely the military teaches us all to operate under very unique pressures. And I think that learning how to operate under those pressures really can set you up for success in the private sector too. An example comes to mind of, I'm in the military in a tech field. It turns out that like a lot of people get experience and get out and work in the private sector pretty quickly. So most of the hands-on technical work being done, at least in the Air Force, was by junior enlisted folks between like 19 and 22. And so I got tasked with big projects of upgrading the base network infrastructure. And on multiple occasions, I brought down the entire base network, had the base commander calling in, looking for updates from my boss, not on purpose, trying to just do the work, maintain the network, but you make mistakes along the way. And I think that those early lessons of commanders like looking for minute by minute update of what's going on while I'm frantically Googling, phone calling, trying to figure out how to fix this problem that has emerged, that I think set me up for just like keeping cool under pressure, because that's actually that sinking feeling of like, oh, something is broken and it might be my fault and I might need to fix it. that's not an uncommon feeling in tech. That's a feeling that I experience probably a couple times a year. So I think that was very important. But then I think the other piece that for me was very helpful is early on learning that in the military, there's some exceptions here, but generally speaking, a broken piece of tech is not life or death.
Right.
and that actually, that just synthesizing that and feeling that in those moments actually, I think helps me perform better in those moments, because when you can bring the pressure down, and in fact, sometimes in those high pressure situations, slowing your mind down is the most effective way to come to a solution quickly. And so I think those pressure cooker moments help me to perform under pressure. And then also, I think the other piece that's worth considering is like when you overcome one of those moments, when you do fix the solution, or when you do launch the new project and you become like, you get your recognition for this cool thing you built, that gave me as a really young man confidence that I can figure out things that I don't know how to do. You know, the military has a habit of throwing people into new situations that they aren't prepared for, or that they got some basic training for, but need to figure out on the fly. And that skill, that's one of the most essential skills for me in my career, is the willingness to just say, here's a problem that I don't know how to solve today and that I have no expertise in. And I just believe in myself that if I put in the time and energy, I can probably figure it out. And I think that level of confidence, some people just naturally have it probably, but for me, it came from seeing what I'm capable of. And I think the military is a really cool environment to learn about yourself and what you're capable of in a high pressure, high output environment.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing is that you weren't afraid to fail, or maybe you were, but you went forward anyways. Yeah. Right. Because there's such value in that. You know, one of the quotes I wanted to read off here, that you've been quoted as saying, and I want to dive into this and just hear, you know, kind of more of what this means to you, is you've been quoted as saying, build a healthy relationship with the work you don't want to do. Let's talk about it. My fiance and I talk about this a lot, as something that can really in a work setting differentiate certain employees from others. And it is that in the military really teaches you that lesson of like, you're not too good for anything. I can think, here's a specific story I remember of, I signed up, I'm a network administrator, right? So I'm thinking I'm going to be doing all hands-on like technical work. Right.
But early on, most of my job was like the grunt work that nobody wanted to do, running cables, crawling through ceilings, drilling holes in walls, like things that not what I had dreamed of doing prior to that. But I think when you have a task like that people don't like doing, and even I didn't like doing it, frankly, I still don't like running cables. It's not my favorite thing. If you can really show your leadership or show the people that manage you that you can be trusted with the things that other people struggle to deliver on, it goes, I think, a long way towards building your reputation on a team, but also towards just like building the reality that like throughout your career. For me back then, it was running cables. Later in my career, it was looking through help desk tickets and solving the ones that all the senior engineers didn't want to solve. Now, as somebody that works at a large tech company, it's much more about like doing the paperwork and like updating Salesforce and doing these admin tasks that engineers hate doing, but building a healthy relationship with that. And when I say building a healthy relationship with that, I think actually I would summarize that as just building the resilience to do things that you don't want to do. And eventually it becomes like, it kind of becomes second nature of like, now I just accept every job. There'll probably be 70% of things that are fun and I enjoy and 30% of things that I don't. And I think accepting that reality sets you up for success more than constantly hoping to find a job that 100% of every single task is going to be
absolutely
just glamorous.
With those kind of early lessons, doing the work that you don't want to do, the kind of grunt work, how did that segue into finding your first leadership opportunities within, the early years of your career?
Yeah, I think that segued into me, like the first leadership opportunity I got in the military was we had a big inspection and they needed a technical lead to basically go lock down all of our network infrastructure. And that is a crummy job that nobody wants to do.
I love your honesty that you're not sugarcoating it. You're just saying, this is what it is.
No,
it's crummy.
I mean, come on. We might have a few people here that have been audited by, especially in the military. Audits are very normal in an operating environment. Every few years, you have some auditors come in, make sure that you're operating at the right level of guidance. That's stressful. It's important, but it's not what it's not a lot of people's idea of fun.
Sure.
So I think I had a reputation from my cable running days of like being somebody that can just get in, do the work, even when other people don't want to. And I think that brought me top of mind. But actually, I would combine it with another thing that we were talking about earlier of education, because I had a reputation in my shop and my team of about 25 people of being a person that would just do the work I was asked to do and could deliver it, but also a person that showed a lot of like ability to an interest in learning technology. So
Sure.
Right before this inspection, I had gotten like a technical certification that made my leaders think like, hey, this person is going out of their way to dig into the technology and possibly deliver on this.
You're
so anyway,
that step further. Yeah.
That was like my first big opportunity to kind of run a team of experts that were building this thing out, that were locking down the network. And that was like a super influential first experience there. Cause like I'm a young kid. I'm leading a team of people that are like sometimes higher ranking than me. Sometimes I've been in for longer or were older than me, and being a technical lead in that environment, like there's a lot of discussions that can branch off of that.
Right.
But I think the point is like, you'd be surprised at what can open opportunities whenever you build a reputation in your team.
I love it. Talk to me about what the military taught you about flexibility and how that impacted your career. So maybe, personal moves or new cities, friends, new experiences. Like, did being in the military and relocating with the military, that allow you in some ways to advance in your career on the civilian side by taking a job, elsewhere across the nation?
Yeah. I think this is a huge benefit that virtually anybody who joins the military has, I think, which is that you've done something that, like, I don't know the statistics, like 80% of society, like, or some crazy number like that will die within 20 miles of the place that they were born. Right.
Right.
Like, most people don't leave. Most people stay with her. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I just want to be very clear. However, when you enlist in the military or you commission in the military as a young person, like you are lifted out of your current community, your current family, your current sphere of like a social environment and put into a totally new one. That's something that most people never have, or many people never have in their entire lives, that you've now done as like the first thing as an adult that you've done is just say, hey, I'm going to start a whole new life with a whole new set of people. At the end of that, you have to make a choice. Like, do I want to move back home or could I do what I already did? Could I start somewhere new again? And for me, I think the experience of doing it once, of saying like, I joined the military, I made friends, I had a happy life in the military, at completely forklifting everything from where I grew up. I had a lot of confidence that I could do it again. So like, don't underestimate the power of like making a really radical decision early in your life, and how much more likely and how much more prepared you are to take a risk like that again later in life after you've done it already once.
How would you, so you finished out your active duty contract, and then you transitioned to the civilian side. And I always want to ask this question during Civvies, because everyone's experience is so different. There doesn't seem to be like a one size fits all, or here, follow these 10 steps and you're going to have a wonderful transition. In one word, describe your transition to civilian life.
I mean, the word I have is, honestly, it was scary at the time. Like now it's funny. I'm going to give you two words. I'm going to break the rule, because at the time, while I was going through it, it was scary. But like looking back on it, incubator is maybe how I would describe it. Okay. It's like a rapid growth period. But at the time, I mean, gosh, going through it, what's more scary in America than I don't have a job and I need to pay the bills. Like I don't like, other than like a health issue or like some nefarious thing going on, like that's about as scary as it can get in the reality that we live in modern society. So, I mean, and especially in the military, whenever your job is basically guaranteed, there's some things you have your side of the bargain, you need to keep up with meeting military standards. But for the most part, if you meet the standards, you're going to have a paycheck. So that uncertainty for somebody like me, who has always, I would classify myself as a relatively high anxiety person. I think I come off pretty confident, and I am pretty confident, and somehow balance that with like maddening anxiety. So like at the time during that transition, like that was what was consuming my thought is, like I need to provide for my family. I've never gotten a real job before. And so it's pretty scary, but fortunately, the transition happened well. I landed the job, and I think that a lot of the fear was unfounded, but at that time, as at 21, 22 years old, I didn't have much context for life and like what employment was like in the private sector. In fact, I would say it might have actually been a somewhat similar time to right now. There's a lot of weird tech job headlines, and I got out like as the economy was kind of rebounding from the 2008 recession. And so the economy you're going into probably influences how you feel about it a lot, because you see all these news headlines that can amplify your own personal feelings,
right, and leave you with
around it.
That a sense of uncertainty.
Yeah.
I want to dive in a little bit more when you transitioned. What I heard was a couple immediate concerns: loss of income, right? You're no longer in the military. So my follow-up question is, how did you survive? Did you go back to school? Did you utilize the GI Bill to have some form of income coming in? Where did you actually move? Did you go back home? Did you just get an apartment immediately? I think that's really kind of important to share those details with those, that are looking at the same transition going, how do I do this?
Yeah, totally. I'll walk folks through some of the details. The one caveat I'll make, though, is I don't have a kid, or I didn't have a kid. And I think that like, if you have a kid, like your story will just have to be totally different. And that's something I'm very empathetic for. A lot of people I know that got out had children, and that's just a totally different. There's certain moves you can't do with a child that you can do as an individual. So for me, what I think everybody should do as you're planning to get out is, of course, you need to save leave, because then you have terminal leave, and that's time when effectively you're already out, but you're still getting a paycheck. And so it's like, think of it as like you're using your leave to get a paid job search time window. So I think I had like 30 to 60 days of terminal leave. That window of still getting a paycheck while I was full-time job searching was useful. Although I did end up, I went back home. I lived with my parents for probably a few weeks before I got my first job. Like I didn't want to sign a lease before I got my first job back then. And I was thankfully was able to stay in my childhood bedroom for a few weeks. It wasn't the ideal. Don't get me wrong. I don't like staying with my parents. Okay. It's not ideal, but it was a great, I needed to do it, or I felt like I needed to do it.
Give me the setup there. Please tell me that your parents just left your room, as it was when you left.
No, it is. There's still ago. To this day, I'm a 32-year-old man now, and there's like Star Wars action figures on the walls. There's dust all over everything. It is like my childhood bedroom to a T. But yeah, I think, there was some sacrifice, but ultimately, eventually on terminal leave, I secured a job offer that I was like, okay, cool. I'm making enough money. I can get an apartment for myself. And before I started my job, I was able to move into an apartment. And then I also proactively had planned to be using the GI Bill as I transitioned, because that's, at the time, I want to say it was like $900 a month of extra income.
Right.
And that it's probably more now, because that was like 8 or 9 years ago, but that was a huge safety blanket as well, knowing that even if I didn't have a job, I could continue taking classes and have enough to like feed myself.
Right. Because you were getting that, the BAH, the basic housing allowance stipend. There was something you said I wanted to dig in on here that I see from my lens in recruiting. I've worked with a lot of military members that have transitioned, into their first civilian job. And there's, I think, from being in the military, there's a lot of loyalty, right? When you join the military, you've signed a contract, you've said, raised your right hand, you're gonna serve and do that for several years. And so, I see that as a common theme with some of these folks that I chat with, where they land their first job and maybe it's not exactly what they expected, but there's this internal conflict as to whether or not they should look for something else, right? Within a relatively short period of time, like 6 months or a year. What's your view on that? What advice would you give for someone in that situation where they know in their core, this is not the position that they want to spend a lot of time with or in, but they have that internal conflict about leaving?
Totally. And here's what's interesting. In the military, in the Air Force, they taught us, like, one of the core values was service before self, right? Like, and by the way, you also sign a piece of paper that literally says, I am willing to die for the service. There's no level of loyalty higher than the vow that you took to give your life for a thing, right? So that there's definitely some if you really buy into it, there's some unwiring that might need to happen, because that higher purpose that you might have had in the military, it shifts. In the working in the corporate world or in the private sector, one big benefit of it, and in fact, one of the big reasons that I looked forward to separating towards the end of my enlistment, was that you get to reclaim your human identity and you get to say, like, I am actually the most important thing. My family is the most important thing, and that's an empowering thing. It can be scary, like, as you're figuring out what this new identity is, if that's a process you're going through. But what's even cooler is, like, yes, as you transition, you get to take that, making yourself a priority and your family and the people you love a priority back. You no longer, nobody really, it will make you sacrifice for something that's not good for you and your family, for some greater good. And what's amazing is, I find that other people in the private world actually respect that. In fact, I've had jobs. I had a job. I'll tell you a very specific example. The first job I had when I got out, I had for about a month and a half. And then I got an offer to double my salary at another job. It's an incredible offer. Was not expecting it. And when I quit that first job, it was a pretty easy conversation with my boss. It was, hey boss, like, I really like the job. Thanks for the opportunity, but I'm trying to build a life for myself, and I can make twice as much money at this other job. I have to take this job. And there's a decision like that, making a decision that's better for you and your family. Maybe you can take care of your family better. Maybe you can start saving for college. Maybe you can do whatever your American dream or your life dream is. Like, you're allowed to pursue that and selfishly prioritize yourself and your family above any company or team or manager. And I think, again, because that's how everybody is wired for the most part in the non-public service world, people are very empathetic to that and understand it. So the last thing I would say is, if you do find yourself in that position where you feel like you're not in the right role and there's other opportunities that could be better for you, processing through that can be challenging. So, like, just reach out to people that have done it before. Like, reach out to me, reach out to others who, I have a lot of friends who've made these very selfish decisions and would tell you that it was the right choice for them in the long term. And and nobody's going to be mad at you. You're not going to let anybody down. You might let yourself down, though, if you stay in a position that.
I love that you touched on that. Right.
Yeah.
You long term, you can compromise yourself and kind of where you want to go. I also appreciate the value in leaning on your network, asking those that have gone before you, how did you approach the situation? So back on, the days leading up to you having this conversation with your boss, I mean, did you kind of go back and forth in your head? Were you worried about that conversation, how that would look, how you were received?
Yeah. I was very worried about I wasn't so worried about the conversation with my boss. I was worried about the optics of, like, what does it look like when I have a 1.5 month job on my resume, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, will I be a job hopper,
Right.
And would that potentially limit my opportunity for other jobs in the future. This is a narrative that's not an uncommon narrative, and there's a broad spectrum of opinions on this subject. I'll just share my opinion. I'm of the opinion that, like, it is true that if you continually churn through jobs, and you, like, let's say you have 5 jobs in a year, that certainly will raise an eyebrow. However, I've never quit a job after 2 months or without another job, right? And so if you think about that, like, if I'm in a job that I want to leave and somebody else offers me a job and I have that job offer in my hand, tell me the downside of leaving your current job. Like what is the downside? You already have another job. You already have another employer that said, I'm willing to hire you, even if you don't
right.
keep going in this job. So I think the narrative of that is, like, oftentimes overblown, because a bird in the hand is pretty compelling when it comes to a job offer. So that would be the one thing is, I've always taken the approach of, like, looking for jobs while I have a job, or like exploring new opportunities.
At this point in the story, you found your footing, on the civilian side. You ultimately end up moving into consulting and lead engineering roles. Tell me a little bit about that chapter.
Yeah, that would be, in my view, that would be the chapter where my career really took off. So I started first 5 or 6 years in my career, I would label myself as like an operator or an engineer, very hands-on, supporting operations at an existing company or organization, where I transitioned to starting to work in consulting at IBM and then a company called VMware. And that was where I started to really see that technology itself is like a means to an end. For some people, that's obvious, right? Like a computer doesn't change the world. A human that figures out how to do something cool with a computer saves the world. And consulting opened up my eyes to the actual, like, value of technology. And when I say the value, I mean, like, the monetary value of technology. Prior to that, when you're solely an engineer, you can oftentimes be disconnected from, like, the projects you're working on and how they drive revenue or efficiency or growth of the company. You're just trying to solve technical problems and you're removed from the business value. But in consulting or in pre-sales or really anything where you are interfacing directly with end customers who are giving large sums of money to your company, or small sums, but consulting, it's not cheap usually. And I think that puts you in put me in, like, a sort of league of folks that were hybrid engineers and communicators. Mm-hmm. And I the reason it was so important for me in my career is because what I learned is, first, I love that type of work. Like, I went from being hands-on behind a keyboard to, like, the person in front of the whiteboard drawing out, like, the next new big thing that we're going to build, or
very cool,
talking to a team leader about how to roll out this project and train their teams. And I found that part of the job actually more intriguing and more interesting to me than the bits and the bytes of engineering. Very cool experience. I think, and there are a lot of great opportunities at big and small companies to do these sort of consulting type of work, and something that I think anybody can benefit from doing for a few years. You get to touch a lot of different teams and a lot of different projects, and I for me, that's just packed a lot of learning into a small period of time.
Can you tell us about, I guess I want to do a comparison between the early years of your career and where you are now, if you will share this with us. In those early years, like, what were you working towards, right? What were your kind of big ticket items, if you will, and in comparison to what you value now? So yeah,
it's a really funny question, because I think most folks over the course of a decade, this should probably evolve. This is, like, pretty personal, but early in my career, I think I was running, my dream was, I want to make, like, a decent living. For whatever reason, in my mind, the number was, I want to make 80 grand a year. Like, I can pay the bills, I can buy a house, like, I can live, like, a good life. Like, that was my dream.
I love that you had a specific number.
To me, like I grew up in a part of the country where like that was a really good salary. $80K a year. That's like what like, people like real professionals made. And I saw people with like beautiful houses and beautiful families that were making that much money. I'm like, okay, cool. Like that's the dream. I can get there.
Right.
And so I think early in my career, I was running really away from, I grew up without much, below the poverty line, I guess I'll say. And I was just kind of running away from that and towards a very vague idea of success, which in my mind was a specific monetary figure. I'm very lucky that I worked in technology and I got into the parts of technology where like 80 grand is actually the starting point, not the ending point. So, what really evolved for me is like, again, I'm speaking from a place of real gratitude here. I got to a point where I have enough money to pay the bills. Like work was no longer a pursuit of like more resources, to like live a healthy, I'd like to live the life that I want. Unless something major changes, I'll have a great life financially. So now, and what's really changed for me in the last few years is I've shifted focus from like acquiring resources and like being like traditionally successful. And I focus a lot more on quality of life and time, right? Because like what matters to me now is like I'm so confident where I'm at. Like I'm not chasing the next promotion or the next raise or the next company. I want to build a family, and I want the time that I spend working and not working to be interesting and fun and as painless as possible. And that changes how I prioritize my time. It even changes the intensity with which I work. I view my career as like, I view my early to mid 20s as a real investment. Actually, my whole 20s as an investment phase in my career. I was working extremely hard to make a lot of progress. And now I'm hoping that I don't have to ever operate with that level of intensity again. And instead I can just kind of make these incremental improvements and enjoy where I've gotten. Like I feel so much privilege and luck and joy from like the fact that I am in the position that I'm in and get to work on things that I find cool and interesting. It's not a normal experience. It's an abnormal experience to have that be your work reality. And so now it's all about just like, sweet, I made it. Like, how do we make this, the rest of this as fun as possible?
Absolutely. You remind me that, time is our most precious commodity, and life, it goes fast, very fast. And I say this from the lens of now being middle-aged, right? When you look back and there's things that maybe mattered to you then that don't now. So I think a lot of people relate to that kind of evolution of what you value. We got to talk about this because when I looked at your experience and dived into your story, there was something that just caught my eye that I thought, man, what a cool pause that you took. We just talked about how your career, got to a certain point where it kind of took off. You do that for a while, and then you take what I would describe as a soulful break and you go hike the Appalachian region. Tell me about what led up to that and like the why. And I just think it's such a cool and unique experience. You mentioned earlier, you had the next job kind of lined up and everyone moves really quickly through life. And I think it's so rare to see folks pause for that amount of time and just do something that feeds your soul.
Yeah. I like the way you describe it's very beautiful, a soulful break. So I'll tell you what, like it was a kind of a wild decision. I was working as a consultant and I was doing it for like a year. I was getting a little burnt out because that particular job, I had to travel Monday through Thursday every single week. So I was on a plane on Monday. I got back late Thursday night and did that for like a year, but that's a really intense travel schedule. Had my personal life was struggling. And I kind of got to a point where like I liked the work, but looking at the travel, seeing that wasn't going to change, I came to the conclusion that like, this isn't something I want long-term. And I'm the type of person that when I come to that, once I have that realization of like, I'm not going to want this 5 years from now, my brain actually says like, cool, like we got to get out of this ASAP because like we're on the wrong path. If this isn't what you see yourself doing long-term, then why keep investing in the short term? Like you should shift gears to something that's more aligned with what you hope to get. However, like I didn't know what I wanted. Like I actually like I knew that what I was doing didn't feel right and it wasn't sustainable long term, but I couldn't say like I couldn't with enough specificity say like I want to have a similar job where I don't travel, or I want to maybe I wasn't sure if I even wanted to keep working in tech. I was really challenging myself with like, maybe you've only been doing tech for like 6 or 7 years now, maybe you can pivot. So all these thoughts were racing through my mind all day long, and I came to the conclusion like I need time to process all this, or I want time to process all of this. I had heard about the Appalachian Trail. By the way, I never hiked a day in my life. The first hike I ever took was the Appalachian Trail, a 2,000-mile hike.
Okay, so that makes us all feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you doing ultra marathons behind the scenes? Like, what is happening here?
No, it was a couch to trek type of situation. And it wasn't even a particularly physically demanding trip. Like you end up hiking like 20 miles a day. You have a lot of fun. You hitchhike in and out of town. You eat a bunch of really terrible junk food along the way. Mm-hmm. But there's not very many opportunities as an adult, especially, to have a chunk of life where you're not working. This is an uncommon experience. Like most people, or a lot of people, are working their entire life, maybe take a month off here and there, or a few weeks of vacation. So I saw an opportunity of like, I had enough savings where I could take time off and not be in a bad spot. I didn't have kids yet at the time. And so I was like, eventually I'll have kids, and something like this, like quitting your job to hike, if you have a kid, would be a much more scrutinized decision. Something I probably wouldn't do, honestly, because I don't know if I'd like to say I would, but I don't know if I would. Mm-hmm. And so I just saw this window of opportunity, this ambiguity and uncertainty in my career. And so I went for it. And I saw this statistic. What I became obsessive over is every year, thousands of people attempt to hike the Appalachian Trail, and less than 10% of people actually complete it. And I was operating off of this theory of like, I wonder what that 10% is. Like I wanted the answer to like, why do 10% make it and 90% don't? And so like that was I just kind of became really engaged and interested in that. And that was the answer. And in addition to just having time, like I wanted to see, like, could I complete it? And what will I learn about myself? Like there's obviously some output of being the 10% of people that can do it, and or do finish it. So the big learnings for me on the trip, I'll say, were like not as huge as I think like you might think of, like, hey, I'm going to be in the woods for 6 months and sleep on the ground every day. Like
right.
I didn't have some like spiritual awakening, but what I did have was a sincere sense of fulfillment and happiness that I didn't know you could get without a job, if that makes sense. Like I thought that I kind of thought that like humans need to be productive to be happy. We need to have a purpose to be happy. My only purpose was finishing the AT, and I was happy as a clam for 6 months. It was one of the most joyful parts of my life. And so I think learning that life is a really flexible thing, and that, like, of course, like I'm an ambitious person. I'm career oriented. I'll probably always be, but knowing as well that my perspective is just my perspective, and that like you can shift between different life perspectives in a single life. And also, more importantly, I think the output of it for me now is just being really empathetic with people that choose to, or like are driven to live their life in a totally radical different way than I do. And I'm very non-judgmental towards any lifestyle now, because it's very easy to like judge a dirty hiker that quit their job to live like a vagrant for 6 months. And now like a decision like that to me actually makes a lot of sense. Like if somebody told me they were going to do that, I'm like, okay, cool. That's awesome. You should do that.
Right. And take that break.
Yeah.
Is that where the beard started?
It was a definite chapter of the beard for sure. That was where but out of I always, like a lot of military folks, I couldn't wait to get out to start growing my beard. It was like one of the first things I was excited. I hated shaving. And then the AT was whenever I first grew it pretty long. And so now it gave me the confidence to rock a long beard. That's what it gave me.
Nice. I'm just imagining it like way down, mid chest, this really crazy
Imagine
looking
it the
beard.
same length, but it was growing horizontally. So it was just like a really wide, crazy animal-like beard.
Nice. So you finish hiking, you return to work, and then I think you jumped into solutions consultant work, and from there it's kind of the rest is history, so to speak, to present, to being a senior solutions architect. What do you do as a senior solutions architect for AWS?
It's a very dynamic role. So like AWS has thousands of solutions architects, and they're all aligned to different industries, different customer profiles. So what you do is really highly variable depending on the sector or customers that you serve and what that sector needs. So for example, I work with fintech customers. The needs of fintech customers, like think of like a popular investing app that you may use and to save money or something like that. So really it's about understanding the business and what they like, their clientele, what they do, and then also understanding the technology stack that you can build a business on, that companies have built a business on top of, which is AWS cloud in this case. And it's a lot of like my charter as a solutions architect is to grow customer accounts, right? Like I don't have a quota, like I'm not a traditional sales person, but the goal is to help customers use more AWS services, which in turn makes AWS more money down the line. So it's a pretty fun job where you just work with you work with leaders to try to inspire them to build new things that they aren't even thinking of building yet, or you try to learn what their priorities are and show them how you can help them accomplish those priorities. That's like half of the job. And then another half of the job is actually getting hands-on and teaching other engineers how to use services. I'm lucky to do something that's a cross section of all these different interests that I have.
Love to hear it. And this is kind of where our paths crossed virtually, because I was actually at the time working for Amazon Web Services as a technical recruiter and recruiting for a solutions architect. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, I had never recruited on that position before, so had to read a lot about what that position entails, and then I just went on a search, right, to see if I could find a senior solutions architect to kind of share some light or experiences and what that means, and found you on LinkedIn and then tripped into your YouTube. And it was fantastic for my own just kind of learning growth and calibration in that space. I want to talk about LinkedIn because you are a force on LinkedIn. Like I mentioned, you're a tech educator. You definitely share a lot of parts of your journey, what you find helpful to others. Why LinkedIn? Why show up in the way that you do? What kind of impact do you hope to make?
It's a really good question. I ask those questions to myself a lot still, for what it's worth. Like I don't have such a clear vision, but I'll tell you I can share the fundamentals of how I think about all of this. And it's multi-pronged for me. I create content on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and I stream a lot of things on Twitch. And my philosophy when I make most things is just like, if I learned something and I learned it the hard way, like how can I make it easier for the next person, right? Like an answer to the question of what is a solutions architect. It's a really hard question to answer. I did my best. There's probably better versions of that explanation, but it's a question a lot of people have. And I think that sometimes here's the basis of my belief is people don't want to, generally, individuals are looking for perspectives from other individuals. And people, I think, generally distrust perspectives from companies. Mm-hmm. And so I view a lot of my, like what I do is like sharing perspectives that like sometimes aren't even that novel, but just like people want to hear coming from another person like them. And I think making it approachable is a big piece of what I hope to do. Like I hope I come off as like fairly like genuine and fairly like normal, like a person that you can be friends with. And I hope that makes whatever advice that I share seem more valid and maybe even more trustworthy. A big thing that I pride myself in is I never have, and I strive to say I never will charge for any training advice that I create. I mentor people one-on-one. I coach them one-on-one. I do that because like I think that's the kind of world I want to be in, where people help each other. Like I don't want to be in the type of world where like the only way to help somebody is if you can make a couple bucks off of it, especially when you're trying to help people that are early in their career. So LinkedIn's just a great platform where what I produce, which is cloud tech career related stuff, there's a huge audience for it. So it's the right place to make content like that if you are making content like that. And it works really nicely with other platforms like YouTube, YouTube will keep promoting your content. So like a lot of my LinkedIn subscribers come from YouTube, and a lot of my YouTube subscribers come from LinkedIn, and it just works. It creates a nice cycle of engagement.
What advice would you give to others who are considering, starting their LinkedIn page or putting content up on YouTube? I think for me in my own journey, when I first started on LinkedIn, there's it's vulnerable, right? To kind of put yourself out there socially, and when I see these larger accounts like yours and some others, I'm always left with the question of like, where did you start? And that's where I go backwards in an account. I actually go backwards and see, how many years did it take someone to get to where you're at? So if you were to give someone advice that, is pretty knowledgeable, they're a SME, so to speak, in their field, and they want to show up on these social channels, where do you start?
It is a just do it type of situation. Like my best advice is just go for it, send it, see where it takes you. But that's a lot easier said than done. So some more tactical advice that I think I can give that is hard to follow, but worthwhile. I find that oftentimes the best voices, the people that create the most interesting and engaging stuff are oftentimes, it's because they're talking to themselves a lot in their mind, and they're thinking a lot. Like they maybe are people that are very introspective. That's great for content creation because you can figure out how to communicate something in a novel way or in a way that resonates with people. That's a really good thing. A side effect of being a very introspective person is that you oftentimes are very self-critical. And in fact, a really common experience for me early on when I was creating would be frantically typing a post just to post it and then 5 minutes later delete it, or to not post it at all because I was scared of what it would say. And one day I was going through this process where I had wasted a half hour writing a post, and I wasn't going to send it. And I said like, yeah, whatever. I spent the time, I click send, and I walk away from my desk. And then I didn't look at LinkedIn for the rest of the day. And the next day I log into LinkedIn, and the post has gone totally viral. It's got like thousands of engagements, and like the best possible case for a creator like me on LinkedIn had happened to that post. And it was just a throwaway. It was just a dumb kind of joke that I thought was kind of silly, and I even contemplated not posting. And in fact, that's been a trend. The things that I think will do well tend to not do well, and the things that I just fling out there on the fly tend to do better sometimes. I don't know why that is. I don't know if I don't know. It's a funny.
We're all trying to figure it out. Yeah.
We're all trying to figure it out. But I would say like just resist the natural urge to censor yourself. And I don't mean like, yeah, if you're on LinkedIn, you probably shouldn't cuss and stuff. But when I say censor yourself, I mean like to censor your ideas. And I think a real slice of humble pie as well of like who cares if nobody likes your LinkedIn post? Like who cares if people do like your LinkedIn posts? Like it like, yeah, like I'm probably making some impact somewhere, but like I think it can be helpful to contextualize it through a lens of like, it's like a cool, fun additional thing you can have in your life or your career, but it's not like something you have to do. Like it's not for everybody. But if you want to do it, you should do it, and you should not get in your own way.
I like that you touched on the fear, because that I think is the initial step, right? Is to kind of like figure out the fear that holds us all back from showing up on social media, and then like, what does that mean? And a lot of folks fear being attacked, right? Or like getting a negative comment, maybe left on their post or their YouTube page. And I think if you experience that, it's really important to pause and kind of like dissect that a little bit, right? It's humorous if you pull back to think that maybe a small comment could just kind of impact you in such a big way, right? You're just sitting on your couch and feeling kind of just bent out of shape about something. But I appreciate you touched on that. One thing you mentioned earlier when you said tactical, I was like, oh, okay, we got to get to this next part. I want to get tactical with some rapid fire solutions architect questions where you're going to have 10 seconds or less, no pressure, to answer some, again, solutions architect related questions. You ready for it, Trevor?
Wait, I'm going to get my 10-second timer.
Okay,
up.
Get your 10-second timer on.
I'm going to stay honest to the challenge of my 10 seconds. All right.
We're
good. I'm ready when you are.
All right, let's start. What do you find most rewarding about being a solutions architect?
The relationships that I build, for sure. Like, these are things that extend far beyond just like an individual project or customer. So like those relationships, because you take them with you your whole life, and they're enriching beyond the work.
How do you maintain a work-life balance while managing the demands of your role as a solutions architect?
Think of your time as a portfolio that you're investing, and scrutinize how you invest that time. Particularly ask the question, what is the impact of this thing that I'm spending my time on? And you should do it often, daily, weekly, but do that a lot, and be ready to admit to yourself that you might have invested your time in something that's a waste of time. And as soon as you learn that it was a waste of time, be ready to cut your losses and move on.
Let it go. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you believe are the most critical skills for success as a solutions architect?
I don't know the word for it. I've heard the word tenacity. I've heard the word like resilience, but I think really it's something we touched on earlier, of just like the confidence to think that you can learn things that you don't know, because a lot of the job is learning one or two steps ahead of your customer and then helping them learn what you just learned. And so I think it's that kind of trailblazing mentality of like, I can figure it out. Like, AWS cloud is such a crazy, complex thing. Nobody knows how it all works. That's an impossible task, but it's very possible to know enough to help your customers. So I think that's what people struggle with.
What are some common misconceptions about the role of a solutions architect?
The number one misconception is that we're like super mega geniuses and we know how everything works. Like I know how like maybe like 5% of the cloud works, and I can figure out 80%. And then there's a additional 15% that I'll never be able to figure out, and I have to phone a friend.
I love it. Last question for you. And this is personally the most important one for me, that I'm going to listen to every word you say here, Trevor. Who can become a solutions architect? Do most have the same background? So I'm talking education, degree, career path.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. What the solutions architecture aside, like just tech in general, like it is a field where people from anyone from any background can make their way into it. I will say solutions architecture is the same, especially I'll say at working at AWS, they do a really particularly good job of building diverse teams, culturally diverse, and diversity on a number of different kind of traditional diversity spectrums. I will say that there is a relatively consistent path to becoming a solutions architect from a experience perspective, and almost always a solutions architect is somebody that worked as like an operator or engineer or engineering leader at a company for, let's call it 3 to 10 years prior to becoming a solutions architect. I would say solutions architecture is generally not an entry-level role. There are some exceptions, but generally that's not the case. Generally, people enter it after a previously successful career in some other engineering space. And so that's the only common thread I can find, though. Education out the window. I know people that graduated high school. I know a person that has a GED and is a more senior solutions architect than I am. So I don't think there's many other correlations other than like working in tech for a few years and building a solid foundation. Basically, building a foundation strong enough to where you're worth being trusted, and that takes time. Well,
Trevor, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining MetroStar Civvies podcast today and sharing your story. We so appreciate your time. Where can those watching this, where can we find you online?
LinkedIn is the best place. So you can just search my name, Trevor Spires, on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter and YouTube. Trev Spires is the handle I go by a lot. And especially if you're a veteran, like, don't hesitate to reach out if you think I can help you with something, or even if you just like the podcast, that's awesome. But LinkedIn and YouTube, those are probably the best ways to follow me and get a hold of me.
Thanks so much, Trevor.
Thank you.